Now, if you kept your finger in 1 Kings, flip back there, because what we're going to look at this morning is we're going to look at two kings. As we begin our study in Kings beyond the life of Solomon, we're actually going to start studying two separate kingdoms, because Israel became divided after Solomon into a northern kingdom called Israel, a southern kingdom called Judah. And we'll see how that happened today. But we will be studying the lives of 19 kings, each in Israel and Judah. Not today, one in each today. But overall, we'll be looking at 19 of them. And the first two are named Jeroboam and Rehoboam. Jeroboam and Rehoboam. Now, that's going to be confusing. So, I've renamed them. I've nicknamed them. Jerry and Ray. Those are the two guys we're going to talk about today. Jerry and Ray. Okay? So, we pick it up in 1 Kings. Actually, in about chapter 11, what we see, we talked about the first half of chapter 11 last week with Solomon, his heart being turned towards idolatry because of all of his foreign wives. And he began to build temples and high places to the other gods and totally displeased the Lord. So the Lord said, I'm going to separate the kingdom because of your sin. And we find that late in David's life, he had three enemies. In verses 14 through 22, we find out about Hadad. And we're not going to read all about Hadad, because we don't know a lot about him, except he was an Edomite from Edomite royalty. And during the time of David, the Edomites had been slaughtered. In fact, Joab stayed 6 months in Edom just so he could kill all of the males in Edom. Well, this guy, who was one of the royalty, was able to escape. And he went down into Egypt and lived in Egypt. And once he found out that David died, and once Solomon was getting older, he started to come against Solomon. No details are given, but basically he's a problem from the south, coming up from Egypt. We've got another guy, Rezon. Rezon's covered in verses 23 through 25, and Rezon also rebelled, only he got his seat of power up in Damascus in Syria. So here, coming up from Egypt and coming down from Syria, Solomon's starting to have some trouble. We think of Solomon's reign as very peaceful, which it was. But towards the end of his reign, things started to go bad, because Solomon stopped focusing on the Lord and started focusing on his wives and his new idols. So then we pick it up in verse 26 of chapter 11, and we find Jeroboam. It says, Then Solomon's servant, Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, an Ephraimite from Zerida, whose mother's name was Zeruiah, a widow, also rebelled against the king. And this is what caused him to rebel against the king. Solomon had built the Milo and repaired the damages to the city of David, his father. The man Jeroboam was a mighty man of valor, and Solomon, seeing that the young man was industrious, made him the officer over all the labor force of the house of Joseph. Now it happened at that time, when Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem, that the prophet Ahijah, the Shilonite, met him on the way, and he had clothed himself with a new garment, and the two were alone in the field. Then Ahijah took hold of the new garment that was on him, and tore it into 12 pieces. And he said to Jeroboam, Take for yourself 10 pieces, for thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, Behold, I'm going to tear the kingdom out of the hand of Solomon, and will give 10 tribes to you. But he shall have 1 tribe for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen out of all of the tribes of Israel, because they have forsaken me, and worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh, the god of the Moabites, and Milcom, the god of the people of Ammon, and have not walked in my ways to do what is right in my eyes, and to keep my statutes and my judgments, as did his father David. However, I will not take the whole kingdom out of his hand, because I've made him ruler all the days of his life for the sake of my servant David, whom I chose because he kept my commandments and my statutes. But I will take the kingdom out of his son's hand and give it to you, 10 tribes. And to his son I will give 1 tribe, that my servant David may always have a lamp before me in Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen for myself to put my name there. So I will take you, and you shall reign over all your heart desires, and you shall be king over Israel. Then it shall be, if you heed all that I command you, walk in my ways, and do what is right in my sight, to keep my statutes and my commandments, as my servant David did, then I will be with you and build for you an enduring house as I built for David, and will give Israel to you. And I will afflict the descendants of David because of this, but not forever. Solomon therefore sought to kill Jeroboam, but Jeroboam arose and fled to Egypt, to Shishak, the king of Egypt, and was in Egypt until the death of Solomon. So if you got this guy is of the tribes of Israel. He's not a foreigner, and he's been appointed during this massive building campaign, 20 years of building campaign during Solomon's early reign, building the temple, and in this case, building the Milo, which actually most scholars believe is the retaining wall that supported the city of David, which was south of where the temple and the palace that Solomon built were. The city of David. And they did some repairs to the city of David, to the wall, to the Milo, that retaining wall, to some of the buildings there. And this guy was so good, he was, such a smart guy. Solomon said, hey, I want you to be over all of the workers from the tribe of Joseph, from Ephraim and Manasseh, the two half tribes, and over them, and you be in charge. So here he was. Now you remember when we talked about Solomon, how rich he was, the tons and tons of gold that were coming in, and so forth. And all of the workers, remember he sent 10,000 guys here and 10,000 guys there, and built all this amazing stuff. Well, it didn't happen just by him saying, okay, let's do this. But instead, he conscripted labor. There was some forced labor going on. And there was a heavy taxation that went on the people to get all the money to be able to do all this building. So during this time, Jeroboam is part of this building campaign. And for some reason, he decided to rebel against Solomon. We don't know why. It doesn't specifically say why, but it says he did. And so he took off and he went to Egypt. But before he leaves, he encounters this prophet, Ahijah. And just like with David, he's told, look, the guy who's in charge right now, I've got problems with him. I'm going to make you king. Now, unlike David, he says, I'm going to give you 10 tribes and keep one tribe down in Jerusalem. But he's been told while the other king is still alive that, hey, you are going to be king. But then Solomon is out to get him. Solomon must have found out some way, or Jeroboam said something, or just decided to act out on this. Again, we don't know exactly what happened, so he ends up down in Egypt. And this is the judgment of God on Solomon's sin of adultery. Look at what it says in verses 37 through 39. I will take you, and you shall reign over all your heart desires, and you shall be king. And it shall be, if you heed all that I command you, walk in my ways, do what is right in my sight, keep my statutes and my commandments as my servant David did, I will be with you and build for you an enduring house. This is a tremendous promise. He's saying, I'm basically going to make a dynasty of you. I'm going to set you up as king of the northern kingdom, and your sons will reign, and your sons' sons, and your sons' sons' sons, and on and on. I will establish you if you will walk in my ways, if you will follow what I command you. This is the same promise he gave to Saul, the same promise he gave to David. It's the same promise he gave to Solomon. It's the same promise he has for you. If you will walk in my ways, I will give you the desires of your heart. He places those desires in us so that we might live them out. He's not going to give you whatever fleshly thing you want to have to spend on your own desires. But he will create in you a heart that is after God. And he will make you into the person you were created to be. That person that you know that you are. That's the promise of God. Just walk after me. It doesn't demand perfection. I love that in every case here, he says, as my servant David did. We all know David wasn't perfect. He had an anger issue. He had a lust issue. He screwed up a few times. And yet he's placed as the example. Walk after me as my servant David. No, not follow his sins, but follow him in that he was a man after my own heart.